Today, our guest speaker is David Drool. He is with Hardage Giddens right up the road on San Jose. And in the interest of fair reporting, I must tell you that I know David because in 2012, he was the person Joy and I went to arrange our funerals. So I can tell you from personal experience, he does a pretty good job. He's here to talk to us about the stuff that's in those folders. And let me just suggest this. If you have a question that is rather on the personal side that concerns you or an issue you have, you might want to wait till after the formal presentation to approach David and talk to him about something like that in private. Having said that, if you have a question, a comment about what he's saying, jump all over him. He's used to it. So without anything else, David, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dan. And once again, I thank you so much for inviting me to be here and part of the Access program. And if it hadn't been for Dan really spearheading this whole concept, then I don't really think it would have happened, because I've been at the location at Hardage Giddens for almost 10 years now. And this will be the very first time that I did a group event and session as we're in today. The very first time. And really, it shouldn't have been that way, but I'm so glad to have the opportunity to be here today. And look at everyone here, and you know, it's so great what I do, and I'm so blessed to be able to do what I do, which is I get to talk to people when they are here and smiling and talking and laughing, and yes, I still meet with families at the time of need and even many weeks and months afterward to follow up with them, just to make sure that they are getting all the materials necessary to move ahead. Because as everyone who has lost someone very close to them would know, that when death occurs to someone very close to you, things don't get done by themselves. So I actually am assisting families afterward, checklists and all kinds of materials to keep them focused on getting things done. So once again, I appreciate it, Dan. So what I'd like to do first of all is I want you to get familiar, and it looks like most of you already have, with what's in the folder that I provided to you. If you're to look on the left side of the inside of the folder, you'll see there's a notes list, some questions there, and this was actually provided by Dan Rekla. And I think it's a great idea. I kind of looked it over, so we'll cover that. Also, I'll talk about life's most stressful events. And that was a survey done at the University of Washington with several thousand people. And so I'll kind of give you an idea of what is the most stressful event on average, and then down to the least. But they're all very stressful. And then you also have another notes page here on the left. And we're going to have a little bit of fun, yes? Even when we talk about pre-planning, we do have some fun. I've got trivia. And I don't care if you yell out the answer, but I'm going to give you the proper answer once we go through that. So we got the trivia, and make sure you circle the answer that I do give you, because I have the cheat sheet. Presentation evaluation form. Oh, it would be great for me to know that actually this was worthwhile doing. And I appreciate all the comments that you have and the feedback. And an advanced planning worksheet. And you know, there's personal information on here, and really the reason why we have this form to give to individuals and couples is because, number one, everyone is different in what they want for themselves and what they would want their family to do for them. So this is just a good way of reflecting on what's important to you and your wishes. So please take the time to complete that. If you decide you want to give it to me, that's fine, but you don't have to. It's really for your benefit and your families. So what I'd like to do first is just kind of delve into this trivia first. So I'll just take it one at a time. I'm not going to bounce around on this, but it's good just to keep it in order, because the cheat sheet I have is in this order. So for ground burial, are the caskets buried 6 feet deep? No. No, they're not. And it's actually an average of about 52 inches. So 6 feet is 72 inches. Well, in the state of Florida, you know, the water table's not too far down. So we'll get a little bit more into that. Okay, so there's always questions about cremation. And yes, it's very, very common. But if I was to ask you, what's the percentage of individuals being cremated now as their wish? What would you say? What's the percentage of the families we serve? Wow, you hit it right on. It is about 60%. Now, when I started with Hardage Giddens in 2009, it was the other way around. So within 10 years, it went from 40% to 60%, and it will just continue to rise. So what's the average temperature of a cremation, or at least to get the process finished? 800 degrees, I don't know. Well, it's 2100 to 2300 degrees. And actually that process takes about 4 hours from start to finish. There's a warm-up phase and a cool-down phase. Does every state in the union require a funeral director to have a license? No. So which state does not? Alabama. One of those states that it's legal to smoke marijuana. It's Colorado. Yes, it is. How interesting. Embalming is required by law if a person is to be buried. It is not required. And I'll tell you the reasons why you would need to be embalmed. If you're going to cross the state line, in other words, we're going to fly you out to another state for final resting place, you would need to be embalmed because the airline requires it. For those of the Jewish faith, we actually will dry pack them in dry ice to keep them preserved, put them in a proper container and get them on a flight to where they have to go, where another funeral home takes them into care from the other airport. So there's 2 funeral homes involved there. The other reason is if you're going to have a public viewing or visitation, your family can always see you privately for a very short period of time without being embalmed. Yes, you would be dressed and casketed and everything, cosmetized, but it's not required. If your family's going to see you for a very short period of time, like before the service, we open up just for the family, and then we close up when the service starts. Is that clear? Good, good. So vaults, what are they used for in a cemetery? That's right. We it's to protect the casket, it's to protect the ground around, because if you go into some very old cemeteries, what do you see? We call it the wave effect. It's like this. So what's that? That's normally a grave space there that has settled, and the casket collapsed over time. And many cemeteries don't go out and refill in and those things. So it's really more for the safety of those that are going to visit in the future. We don't want people tripping and falling going into the cemetery. This is quite interesting. I think Dwight almost had this the other day when I met with you guys. The 2 presidents that died on the same day, July 4th, 1826. Dwight, did you get it right the other day? Okay.
He's been going to the lunch.
Who is the only other president buried in Arlington National Cemetery besides John F. Kennedy? Who said? It is Taft. William Howard Taft. Truman is actually buried in Independence, Missouri. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is buried in Hyde Park, New York, and Herbert Hoover is buried in West Branch, Iowa. May anyone make their funeral arrangements in advance? Yes. Yes, and usually all arrangements may be made in advance, but there are certain things that cannot be paid in advance, and I'll go into that. Can I make cemetery arrangements in advance? Of course. There have been couples, individuals, for many, 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 many generations going into cemeteries and buying space in a cemetery. But I'll tell you this, there are many, many spaces in cemeteries that go unused. Because maybe you had grandparents or parents that bought multiple spaces years and years ago because, well, it was a lot less back then to buy all these spaces. And a lot of those spaces go unused because little did they know that their children and their grandchildren will grow up and move away and put roots in somewhere else, and they have no intention of going back there. Right? So I just wanted you to know that that is very much the case. Is a family required to put an obituary in the paper? No. No. Don't. But you know what? If you don't tell your children or your next of kin not to do that, when they come in to meet with a funeral director, they feel compelled to do it because they don't know any better. The director will say, would you like to run an obituary? And they would say, well, isn't that what people do? And then they would do it. So make sure that you leave clear direction as to whether they should or should not. It's very, very important. Who wants to waste money and spend a lot of money on those things? And people who know you and love you, they know that you're gone. Right? Somebody communicates with them and they will know. But it is at your discretion and the family's to do so. Do I have to purchase an urn or casket from a funeral home? No. You can order a casket on Costco or Sam's Club or online or whatever. Now there's a situation can arise where if that is the case, the casket is delivered to us and maybe it's damaged. Well, now we have no recourse. So believe me, funeral homes have come well in line with their pricing on caskets and things. You just have to be very cost conscious. That's, everybody should be that way. But when you can choose things for yourself ahead of time, it leaves that burden off the shoulders of your loved ones. I know personally. So how long does it take to get a death certificate, certified copy of the death certificate? It, on average, is about 10 to 13 days. 10 to 13 days. Sometimes it's faster, it just depends. The process for us obtaining the death certificate, and we do that for the family. They just pay us, it's a third-party expense. We're going to go to Vital Statistics and we're going to obtain them for the family. We don't want the family going into the Vital Statistics office and standing in line all day. We're going to do that for them. But it is a long process to get death certificates certified.
How many do you think you need?
On average, a family may need about 10 certified copies. Is cemetery property tax deductible? You know why? Because it's not taxed. There's no taxes on cemetery property. Can I take the cremated remains home? Yes, you can. And when a family member comes in, next of kin comes in, and they're going to sign all the necessary documents to take possession of that urn. Really what they do with it at that point is up to them. It's not our responsibility. We just need to make sure that they pick the urn up and your ashes within a 60-day period of time. We cannot keep it there. And I have actually had to go deliver because maybe the next of kin it's just very, very difficult. And we all know that, right? But we can't keep it there with us. So it's very important. Let's see. Is there a special cremation casket needed for cremation?
No. Special cremation what?
Casket. A special container, so to speak. Well, yes, there is. We don't just have someone in a hospital gown and put them into, it's actually called a retort. It's not a crematory. We call it a retort. That's what the terminology for the cremation chamber is, so to speak. So it's very difficult to move someone around that is deceased. And so we're trying to always keep things dignified, right? And so the body goes in a container that's about the size of a person, and then we're able to move it into the crematory, and then the process starts. And that container, it's very minimalistic. So sometimes it's just reinforced cardboard with some other reinforcements around it, but we have to be able to move someone in a dignified manner. And that container becomes part of the ashes that the family gets, and that's why we want it so minimal, right? Kind of makes sense? Who is allowed to be buried in a VA National Cemetery?
Okay.
Honorable discharge of their spouse.
Anyone else?
Honorable
Final answer?
discharge of their spouse.
It is C. Honorably discharged veterans, spouse, and dependent children. Okay, so I just want to give you an example because this has happened many times since I've been at Hardage Giddens. So there was a lady and her husband that had a child that has always been dependent on them. Now, this child was 42 years old because she had learning disabilities and things like that. So she has always been dependent on her parents. So she's entitled to be with Dad, who is now at the National Cemetery, and her mother will be there too. All three of them will be together, right? Now, yes, sir.
Put the word in discharge. What if somebody's on active duty and dies? They still can be buried,
Oh, yes.
correct?
Oh, yes.
So it doesn't have to be discharged.
Yeah, active duty, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So if you're a veteran, you have a child, and they get to be 21 years old, and then they're in an accident, now they're a quadriplegic, well, that doesn't qualify.
It does not.
No, because that child was not always dependent on the parent, the veteran. So we're clear on that. I bet that cleared up some things when it comes to veterans' burial benefits. Can all charges that relate to funerals and or cemetery expenses be prearranged and locked in at today's cost? You're right, no. Because third-party expenses cannot be locked in. So yes, I've had the honor of serving so many people over the years that I've been at Hardage Giddens, and many of them will choose to put third-party expenses in a prearrangement, and others will choose not to. Now, what are third party? Is there going to be an obituary, which we spoke about earlier? You know, the average cost of an obituary about the size of a sticky note in just the local paper here. How much do you think that costs? One day, one time. $450 in the Florida Times-Union, about that big. Just one day, one time. So that's an expense that comes up at the time of need. The cost of death certificates. In the case of a cremation, we have to actually achieve a permit to move forward with the cremation. And that's why cremation itself, from the time we take somebody into our care to the time that the family gets the urn back, it could be 10 to 13 days, which we already know is what? The timetable for a certified copy of the death certificate. They kind of go hand in hand. So it's just so regulated. It is so regulated right now. And that's it's because of, and I'm sure everyone has heard this, there were some very seedy things going on in this industry. I mean, they were to the point where they were mass graving people and not performing the cremation. So now local governments have become involved in this process. So everything has to be well in line before we can achieve that permit from the county medical examiner. So when somebody comes to me and they say, David, I just want a simple cremation. That's all that I want. Well, it sounds simple to that person, but we know on our end that it's very complicated. There's lots of things that go into getting to that point. So so while we're here, we're educating, right?
May I ask you something?
Yes, ma'am.
I got as far as third-party expenses cannot be, what was it you were saying?
Well, it's not locked in.
Cannot
it-
be locked in.
Yes, those expenses get determined at the time of need. And when I was speaking about the permit, it's $50 right now to get that permit. When I started in 2009, it was $25, and then one December they doubled it, so it went to $50. Having your hair done, that's a third-party expense, and sometimes it can be done by your hairstylist. We provide a private room for the hairstylist to go to our location, and they can do your hair if they feel honored to do so, and many hairstylists will do that. Some feel a little funny about it, but we do provide that. So your hair being done, it's generally about $70, $75. Some women will spend a lot more on their hair than that. But yes. An expense that can come up that many families had the misconception of thinking that it was already taken care of is opening and closing of the grave. That's when they excavate that site. They're going to set that vault down into place, set up the tent, the chairs, the lowering device. Many times, parents would tell their children, okay, everything has been taken care of, and so just call Hardage Giddens. So the time comes, the family comes in to meet with the director, and they say, my dad said that everything was taken care of. And they say, well, then the director says, well, show me what they have. Well, here's their space at the cemetery. And the director says, do you have anything else? And generally, it's no. They say no. Just because you have a space doesn't mean everything's taken care of. There are all the expenses to get you to that space on the funeral side of things, and some additional expenses in the cemetery, which is what I spoke of, the opening and closing. That right now in Jacksonville, just about any cemetery, is close to $2,000. Just that. And then you have to have some type of monument or marker. If you're a veteran, you know you and your spouse are entitled to space in the National Cemetery at no cost. They just don't do anything to get you there. But yes, third-party expenses, do not let your family forget about that. What would the beneficiary of your life insurance need in order for the insurance to pay your claim? A long form of the death certificate, the one with the cause of death. Because some insurance policies don't cover certain causes of death. What a surprise. When is the funeral bill due?
You do it if you paid.
Yes. If a prearrangement has not been set up, when is it due? Before the services are performed. Now, yes, many people have life insurance. So do I. So does my wife. And I have a plan also for pre-planning my cremation. But to get your hands on the benefit of the life insurance can sometimes take weeks. And there's another thing. I have met with many families who came to me and said, I need to do a spend down for Medicaid. What's that? Well, mom or dad might be in a nursing and rehab facility. And I'll tell you right now, if you don't have long-term health insurance, you'll burn through everything you have real fast. Just when you think you got it all together, it's not. If you have whole life and it has cash value to it, they'll make you spend that out too. So families will come to me and they'll say, an attorney told me I need to take care of this. I need to get a funeral pre-plan done, whether it be trust or insurance, but I have to get this done with this amount of money. And it needs to be made irrevocable, because when it's made irrevocable, it doesn't count toward your assets, and therefore you'll qualify for Medicaid to pick up the tab for you to be in nursing and rehab, if that happens to be the case. So see how there's so many misconceptions? A prearrangement is one of the things that you can have and it never be taken away. Now, I've seen prearrangements that were done in the 1970s, and now mom or dad is in nursing and rehab, and this is the case. That's the case where they have to do a Medicaid spend down, and with a single document, I can make it irrevocable. So now, once again, it can't be taken away. So it's hard to sometimes be the bearer of bad news, but there's all these misconceptions, and most individuals and couples are not educated about these things. So that's, once again, why I'm here. Can cremation remains be buried in a traditional space in the cemetery? Yes. Actually, you can have two urns in the same space, but there would be what's called a second rite of interment. So that means both urns and whoever is in those urns can have memorialization on that space. So the husband and the wife can be on that marker together. I'll give you another example of that. My mother wants to be placed at the foot of her mother, my grandmother, who's at Oak Lawn Cemetery. And I've already taken care of all that for my mom. But her urn will be placed there in its own little vault at the foot end of my grandmother. So just know that's the case if there is going to be a cremation and someone would want to be with a loved one. You can make that happen. Yes?
You arranged for me to be sent up to Nashville, and I have the plot up there, which was part of my family, but we now are putting another family member in that same plot, and the cemetery says the stone that's already got my name on it and already but the ending date
Right.
is no longer good. They cannot put two of them.
Right.
So that one's going to have to be taken out and both names put on there. So yes, you can do it, but there's more than just,
Right.
you can't scatter another stone there because they've got to have ways to cut that stuff.
Yep, you're right. 10 minutes. Got to be done. We're almost there. Okay, yeah, how much does the average person weigh after cremation? What's the answer to that, you think? You will find this very ironic, but it's 5 to 8 pounds. It is D. And guess what? The average weight of a child at birth is what? 5 to 8 pounds.
How much does the box weigh that they burn you in?
Remember I said it's like a reinforced cardboard. That's next to nothing. It just doesn't weigh much. That's not what makes up the weight. I won't get too much into all that bone and all that. But anyway, what is a memorial service and what is a funeral service? The difference between those two. What's the answer there?
You got a casket or not.
Mm-hmm. Whether the body is present or not. So if the body's not present, it's a memorial service. It's a funeral service if there is a casket there. Are funeral expenses tax deductible? We kind of covered this with cemetery, but no, they're not. Because why? They're not taxed. If someone decides to have us do some catering and everything, that's the only thing that's taxed. That's on a prearrangement at the time of need. How many acres does the Jacksonville National Cemetery own? Yeah, the answer is actually not there, because the truth is it's 526 acres. It is as large as Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Okay. What do you think, Dan?
I think it's time for some questions, answers, and if you'll wait till I bring the microphone around to you, I'd appreciate it. So just keep your hand up. Pardon me.
In relation to burial out of state, cremation instead of the regular funeral arrangements, if you have an out-of-state plot, are all the states the same?
You're going to have the urn placed in another state once you've been cremated here.
Right.
Is that the question?
We have that. Also, we have two plots,
Okay.
and we are going to have cremains instead of remains.
Okay.
Can we have other members of the family buried in that plot?
Normally just two. There's a first rite of interment and a second rite of interment. So you can have two urns or one casketed remains and one cremated remains. But you can only have two in one space. If you have two plots, you can get four. Maybe two people are cremated, the other two are buried. So yes, you can have two in each plot. So you could have four. Yes, ma'am.
You indicated that to open the space here in Jacksonville, it's about $2,000.
On average.
Is that the same for burying an urn as it is for burying a casket?
It's actually less than half as much for an urn. They don't have to excavate as much, and it's easier. They still set up the tent and the chairs and everything, yes, for the family.
Would you talk about costs, please, cremation and other kinds of costs?
Okay, so the average cremation here in Jacksonville is probably about $3,000. What would you say the average burial is? Just on the funeral side. Let's not count cemetery, but just on the funeral side. What would anybody just throw out a number? It's really about 10, 11, 12,000. If it's 15,000, then you got a really, really nice casket.
More questions?
Yeah, if it's $3,000 average here, I heard somewhere that St. Augustine area was lower.
It just depends on if I will say this much: there are companies that just do cremation, and many of them are open Monday through Friday, not the weekend. So if death occurs at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, guess when your family gets to go and see a director on Monday? Now I know, because I've been doing this long enough to know that families, when the death occurs, what do they want to do? They want to get in and get things going for their loved one. So there are major differences between those. You can go out and get a cremation for $1,200, but I guess I could, when it comes to how you're taken care of, how the family's taken care of before, during, and after, it's night and day. So if it's about money, then obviously you go to one of these cremation places. If it's about how everybody's serviced at the time of need, then you go to a funeral home. Yes, sir.
I once read within the last year of a
procedure where they can just get rid of the body with chemicals and heat, and it's probably completely removed of the evidence of the body.
Yeah.
Is that catching on anywhere?
I've seen that also. It's not common until it does become common. We're not involved in it. But there is something out there because, not to get into too much detail, but there's the body's dissolved in a liquid, basically. But, you know, I guess it could be no different than a cremation, right? It becomes ashes. I don't know. It's just not real common, but until it gets to the point where it's well accepted everywhere, then all the funeral homes start providing that. But we're not at that point.
David, you talked earlier about death certificates, and I wonder if you'd go a little bit more into the long form, the short form, the certified and the non-certified, because there are going to be people who are going to want a copy of that death certificate. Some of them will want the original, some will take a copy, but could you talk more about that?
Yes, and what Dan was mentioning was, okay, so generally, if there's an attorney involved, then they want the short form. They don't want the long form, the one with the cause of death. If it's an insurance company and there's a life insurance policy, they want the long form. So they do want the one with the cause. And then there's some institutions that will just take a copy. Now, you need to know that, and your family needs to know that when you try to make a copy of a certified copy of a death certificate, it comes out sometimes all black because it's watermarked, or it says void copy all over it. So actually, it's something that I do when I meet with families afterward to deliver the death certificates, have them sign for it, get the urn, take possession of it. I'll go over all these things with them, but I'll tell them to get their well, so many people have a smartphone, you know. Of course, your children do, and maybe you do too. But when it comes to taking a picture of a certified copy of a death certificate, you can get a nice one. And you can send it to yourself on your computer, and you can print a color copy of it. And many institutions only want just a copy. Now, your family might send off a certified copy to a credit card company to close the account or whatever the case is, and then all of a sudden it comes back to them, and they'll go, well, why did they send it back to me? Because they just want to make a copy themselves and see it, and then they send it back. So I always tell families that I meet with, don't be surprised if you get these back once you've sent them out.
What are the most common misconceptions or surprises that people get when they walk in to see you?
Well, at the time of need or before?
At the time of need.
Okay, so the biggest misconception is that they think that everything was taken care of.
Everything was paid.
And it was not. So it is the worst thing to have to tell a family that this is all that there is, and this is all that was taken care of. And so it's hard on the family, it's hard on the director and the staff to have to tell them that. But so that's why it's so important. You know, I meet with so many people, and they'll say, I've got everything taken care of, David. And I'll say, well, tell me what you have. And then they rattle off some things, and I'm like, you don't have it all done. You think, in your mind, you think you have it all done, but you don't. And I love to do a file review with the grown children. So it might, that son or daughter might be 60 years old and mom or dad is 80, 85. And I want them to come in to see what has been put in place in the form of a prearrangement, so we can talk about exactly what we're talking about today, so they well understand what has been done and what their role is going to be and what's left to be done. And that way there's no misconceptions. We just don't want that.
So who takes care of Social Security?
Well, that's a great question. So whenever the death certificate is formulated and finalized by a funeral director, it's triggering Social Security automatically. So whoever the surviving spouse is still has to apply for the one-time death benefit of $255. Wow.
Can you give us an estimate of ballpark of what you're finding is not being covered? We know that we've done all the pre-planning we can. We think we paid for as much as we can. Give me a ballpark of what the families that have done that, are they needing to put in another 5,000, 10,000? What do they need?
Well, if they have in fact paid for as much as they can, with the exception of the cash advance items I talked about, the third-party expenses, then they've done everything that they can do.
I'm talking about opening, closing getting graves and all the stuff that can't be done now.
No, it can be.
Well, okay.
Yeah, that can be.
What are you running into? Give me a ballpark number, because I think I've done most of what you said, but give me a ballpark as to what I need my relatives for me to cover.
Okay, so let's just use as an example a cremation, right? So is there a prearrangement for cremation? Do you have a final resting place? And has everything been taken care of financially to make sure that your urn can be placed in that space?
Not unless you-
I'm just, but I'm,
You've done it, see, that's-
and so, and once again, letting your family know about third-party expenses. Is there going to be a monument or a marker or some type of a headstone or memorialization, we call it? And has that been taken care of? But there's really only two major components. There's funeral or cremation, and there's cemetery expenses. Now, I do run into this from time to time, which is someone they're traveling, they're on vacation, they're going to see friends and family, and tragedy occurs there. Now what? So now it depends on where is final resting place to get them there, and that can cost thousands of dollars. So that's the one thing that many people, they don't have that component taken care of. The cost to get them from basically anywhere in the world back home. Okay?
Give us a number, though.
The number for everything, if it was going to be
That you're running into in 2019.
right.
All right,
For what? For cremation or funeral?
What do people usually have, what do families usually having to come up with?
What?
all right, I can,
So
I can,
5,000, 10,000?
I can answer that
it's-
question for her.
yes.
Here in this folder, I have what was told, my wife and I have a prepaid funeral service,
Good.
okay? You know what I'm paying right now? And no way Hardage Gibbons called me and told me I didn't have it all paid for. So I go in and check with them to see, and I can tell you exactly what I'm paying them now, and no way was I going to write them a check. So they said they'd give it to me, on a interest-free installment, which I am taking right now.
Right.
And I can tell you
Trust.
exactly what it was, and it's $6,892. And now they have told me that I don't have the vault to put the casket in, and now I've got to go back and negotiate that.
So that's more in line with the counselor, whoever it was that met with you, because we're all licensed. So, because I wasn't there at the meeting, I don't want to speculate.
This goes back to 83.
Okay, so in 1983 is when you did the plan.
That's right, but
Okay.
Hardage Gibbons.
Right.
Okay.
So,
David, this is probably one of those circumstances where if somebody has a unique situation, they
Sure.
want to get with him or
Yeah.
another funeral planner at some point. But-
once again, I always offer to do a file review. It doesn't cost anything. I'm happy to do it for anybody, but I don't want to do it with just you. If you've got other next of kin, whoever, son, daughters, local, would like to meet with me, that would be fantastic, because then they're going to get the message, and you're not giving it to them, I am. Which, that's really, they will understand then what their responsibility is at the time. And there won't be any
Got
misconceptions.
a question for you here.
Yes, sir.
Splitting ashes and internment in different spaces, is there anything that somebody should know about?
You mean like commingling? Or
No, I'm
Okay.
talking about different locations.
Yeah, you can do that.
Are there any problems with it?
Not particularly, no. No, you want to separate your ashes into, okay, however many parts, so to speak, or portions. Portions. So portions, yes, you can do that, as long as these final resting places that are in multiple locations, they allow for a second right, if it's going to be in a grave space or whatever, with somebody else. Yes, but you can do that. Yes.
Question,
Yes, sir.
does the funeral home or whoever disperse or get rid of the ashes for the family?
No.
No? The family's required to take the ashes?
Yes. Unless we're going to do it in an interment at the National Cemetery or in one of our cemeteries or a private cemetery that we're part of the interment. That's actually the terminology for it.
If we get a plan with you, prepay everything as much as you can, visiting friends out in Washington and die, is your plan going to cover me being cremated out there and flown back here?
It can happen in that order if that's what you choose.
Is it better to be cremated out there? And if so, do you pay for the cremation?
Well, yes, if the prearrangement is already in place and it is a dignity provider, which we're all over North America, wasn't to get too much into our company, but in that case, yes, those funds can be moved to that location in Washington. They will take care of the cremation there and send your urn back here if this is where a final resting place is for the ashes.
It costs thousands of dollars maybe. Is that shipping an urn or is that shipping a body?
A body. And I have additional coverage to get me back from anywhere in the world at no cost to my family. Even though I want cremation, I could be cremated somewhere else and they would handle that there, but I can tell you right now, just from experience, families don't want you cremated somewhere else. They want you back here. I'm just saying. I've seen it. 98% of the time, they want mom or dad back here, or brother, sister, whoever. They want them back wherever you reside.
On the obituary, I assume the family writes the obituary. What involvement do you have with an obituary and as far as getting it to newspapers and that sort of thing?
So the publication of choice, it does vary what their rules are of accepting an obituary, because generally it's only, it is sent via a funeral director, a licensed funeral director. So it's not coming from the family. So once you come in and meet with the family comes in and meets with the funeral director, that's the time where they'll look over, whatever's been drafted up, and then they will submit it to the publication of choice via email.
So the family can compose it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Use that.
Yeah. See,
Is there a difference between a death notice and an obituary?
yes.
And the death notice
Death notice is normally very short, like a little block. You
is
see 'em.
that costly also
That-
for the
there's
newspaper?
no cost in the
That's
Florida Times Union in the local paper.
That's what I
But there
thought.
may be other locations and publications around the country that actually charge for that, so it varies. It does. So this is a sample here of what we consider to be a personal planning guide, and whenever we meet with someone, we order one of these, and what you do with this is you record in pencil what your wishes are. I did this with Dan and Joy, and that way that your family knows the details behind what you want. Whenever I sit with an individual or couple, I'm putting together the nuts and the bolts of the service, whatever it is that they're asking for, right? And going over all the details of that. But the fine details can be recorded in here, so that your family's not, how many has had to actually go in at the time of need and take care of a loved one's arrangements? Raise your hand.
Wow.
It's probably a father, could be a spouse. So why leave it up to that point in time for your next of kin to have to come in and start choosing flower arrangements and everything? You can actually put down in writing what you want them to do, and they would just look at the director and say, well, my mom loves white roses. We got to have some white roses in there. She told me. It's in my book here. And that's all that you have to do. You can complete this, and then you can give it to your loved ones, and all they would have to do is bring that in and give it to the director. And now the director is not peppering them with all these, it's up to like 80 questions that they would ask them. So it's just, everything is so much, I won't say it's easy because you're losing a loved one, right? But it makes it a little bit easier. Why do you do anything throughout your whole life to help your children or your family? This is just checking the box off. Okay, I did this, I got this done, and that's great. It's being proactive.
Any more questions for David?
Some good questions.
I will, from personal experience, I will tell you that what you do matters. What you don't do matters. And one of the things you really ought to do if you decide to do any pre-planning is tell the people who need to know that you've done it and tell them where the information can be found.